interesting is the anterior cingulate cortex. This part of the brain has to do with emotion, cognitive abilities, empathy, and impulse. I find it fascinating how much of this part of the brain affects our daily life and how it is formed through childhood. The anterior cingulate is a part of the cingulate cortex, which is a section of the cerebral cortex. This cortex controls many aspects of who we are and our daily behavior. This cortex is made up of gray matter, which is the highest at a very young age in prunes throughout life. Primary points of life when synapses and gray matter prune is around the age of 2 to 3 and during adolescence. During adolescence and as a young child, there is a lot of emotion and instability which is affected by the anterior cingulate. Pruning has an impact on certain aspects like cognitive abilities, mood, and brain and sexual maturity. The location of the anterior cingulate is between the frontal lobe and the corpus callosum. It is a part of the cingulate cortex, which takes up parts in the medial part of the brain. Within the cingulate cortex, there is the anterior cingulate and the posterior cingulate. The ACC consists of gray matter, which can contain glial cells, synapses, capillaries, cell bodies, etc. Gray matter differs from white matter in the way that there is much more myelinated fibers in white matter, and emotions, memory, perception, and speech are all controlled by regions of the brain with gray matter. The anterior cingulate is strongly connected to the limbic system, specifically the amygdala and the hypothalamus, which are big centers of the brain that control emotion and several autonomic functions. This partially explains why the anterior cingulate controls some aspects of emotion and placing emotion on certain stimuli. We all get emotional over certain things, and for each person it can be different. For example, one person may get really emotional seeing a dog get hit by a car because their dog got hit by a car, whereas another person who saw the dog get hit may not get as emotional. The person whose dog got hit by a car had their emotion attached to the stimulus. The ACC contributes to motor functions, pain perception, and some autonomic responses. Pain can be subjective, and every person has a different threshold for certain pains, which can be controlled and guided by the anterior cingulate. When we feel a sense of pain, it immediately activates the anterior cingulate, which tells us that we experience something uncomfortable or very painful. The anterior cingulate has control over some things like autonomic functions, which can include muscle movement, heart pulse, breathing, digestion, and many other internal processes. The two other processes the anterior cingulate can control is decision-making and impulse. The ACC looks at a situation and evaluates how the individual will respond, whether it be positive or negative. Damage to this cortex can result in aggression and poor responses to stimuli in certain situations. For example, if there was a lesion covering the part of the ACC, social processing may be affected with the person with the lesion and will have trouble with being socially aware. Our cognitive abilities are guided by the anterior cingulate, and aspects like social cues and empathy towards strangers and loved ones. The act of doing something to benefit another person can be affected by the anterior cingulate and the environment of how someone was raised. A cool example I learned was that monkeys hold a lot of empathy towards animals, and they have strong activity in their anterior cingulate. Animals who have empathy tend to care when they see another animal in distress and will attempt to help. Making this video has taught me a lot about this particular part of the brain and how important it is. The anterior cingulate cortex affects so many parts of us that we couldn't live without.